Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to talk about the policy implications of what we just talked about in terms of ideology. In other words, we talked about the role of government. Liberals believe in an active role for the government. Conservatives, a less active role, a more passive role for government. Liberals favor a more egalitarian society. Conservatives favor a non-egalitarian society where rewards are given to people on the basis of how much they work, how creative they are, how innovative they are. So what I want to do then is take these big ideas and then translate them into policies. Like how does this tell us, what does this tell us about the kind of policies that liberals and conservatives tend to support? So I want to talk a little bit about economic policy first, and then we're going to talk about social policy. So when I talk about economic policy, I'm talking about the role that the government plays in distributing wealth and in redistributing wealth. So for example, how the government taxes people is an example of an economic policy. How they're going to, who they're going to tax, how much they're going to tax. Spending sometimes is a form of an economic policy, where the government spends its money, who benefits, who doesn't benefit. So when we talk about economic policy, we're talking about those kinds of things. Now there's something else, there's another kind of policy. It falls into the category of economic policies. They're called redistributive policies. So economic policy is the big category. Redistributive policies are a part of that. A redistributive policy is a policy where you take wealth from one group and you go ahead and you give it to another group, right? So for example, and maybe you should try, and if you want to pause the computer or the video and go ahead and think about what kind of policies fall under that category. Thunder. We just had lightning. I don't know if the flash showed up on the screen, but it's raining today. So what kind of policies take money from one group and go ahead and give it to another? So you can pause the computer if you want to go ahead and sort of think about that, but I'll just wait a second, then I'll give you examples. So welfare is an example of a redistributive policy. In our political system, it is the case that wealthier people pay most of the taxes. Most of the taxes are paid by people with a high income. There's a large segment of the public that doesn't pay any federal income tax. They pay other taxes. They pay gas taxes, sales taxes in their state. But in terms of federal income tax, they don't pay that. They do pay into Social Security, but they don't pay any income tax. Welfare is an example. Like, let's talk about the federal food stamp program, where you're taking money from one group and you're going to go ahead and you're going to give it to another group. Essentially, the stuff that is provided by the food stamp program has to be paid for with taxes, and those taxes come primarily from wealthy people. In some ways, at the state level, and I guess the federal government's involved too, public education is a form of a redistributive policy, in as much as wealthy people are taxed more, and yet they probably are less likely to use the public education system than poorer people. So all these are examples of taking wealth from one group and giving it to another group. And it's usually taking it from people who have a lot and giving it to people who don't have that much. So we've talked about what liberals believe in terms of the proper order of society and the proper role of government, what conservatives believe in terms of the proper role of government and the proper order of society. So let's ask yourself a question. If you look on the lecture notes, it says liberals and then it says favor, oppose, and you get to circle one. Go ahead and ask yourself, do liberals tend to favor or oppose redistributive policies? And next, do conservatives tend to favor or oppose redistributive policies? So go ahead and pause the video, and go ahead and circle those, and then turn the video back on. Liberals tend to favor redistributive policies, right? Remember we talked about that idea of that there shouldn't be huge disparities in terms of wealth. So for a liberal, in order to get achieve that more egalitarian society, going ahead and taking money from wealthier people and giving it to people who are less wealthy accomplishes that goal. That's why liberals are more likely to favor things like the minimum wage or welfare or unemployment benefits, things like that. That's the idea, or investing money in education. Conservatives tend to oppose redistributive policies. The idea is, again, when I talked about this in the other video, looking, for example, at the case of the minimum, or let's just talk about taxation. The idea is that if you've got somebody who's working really hard, very creative, very innovative, and they're making a bunch of money, and you've got somebody who isn't very creative, they're not improving themselves, they haven't developed any skills, this person who decides that they just want to work at McDonald's the rest of their lives, if you go ahead and you tax the person who's making more money, you're essentially punishing that person for his or her success. And the person who's decided to work at McDonald's their whole life, you're basically rewarding them for not doing that much and not trying to improve themselves. So for conservatives, that idea of having an egalitarian society, that's not a value. And so they would tend to oppose redistributive policies. And so then the section down there says, why are liberals more likely than conservatives to support redistributive policies? That's the basic idea. Now, in terms of social policy, when I talk about social policy, I'm talking about policies that affect the relationships among citizens and between citizens and how they interact. And so the example that I'm going to give here is same-sex marriage. Thinking in terms, again, of what liberals and conservatives think in terms of an egalitarian society, do you think liberals tend to favor or oppose same-sex marriage? And do conservatives favor or oppose same-sex marriage? Go ahead and answer that. And if you want to, you can pause and write out the answer to on the lecture notes. It says, why are liberals more likely than conservatives to support same-sex marriage? You can pause this and go ahead and do that if you want to, or you can just wait 1 second. I'll give you some time to turn off the video, and you can just pause it. Liberals tend to favor same-sex marriage because, once again, they have this idea that society should be egalitarian, and so the idea is that, well, if straight people can get married, then gay people should be able to get married as well. That's that notion of egalitarianism. For conservatives, sort of that idea of conservative, to conserve things. For conservatives, since the egalitarian thing isn't an issue, the idea is that marriage has been for quite a long time defined primarily as a relationship between a man and a woman. That has been the case. That's why same-sex marriage, the idea of a same-sex marriage, is really something new. And so for conservatives, because they're not as concerned about this idea of an egalitarian society, they're more reluctant to go ahead and change something like marriage because it's such a foundational block of society. The family unit is so foundational to society that they're more inclined to not go ahead and be in favor of those kinds of changes. That's the general idea. So the point I'm trying to make is that when we understand what liberals think about the proper role of government and the proper order of society, and we understand how liberals think, conservatives think about the proper role of government and the proper order of society, we can start to understand why some policies are supported by liberals and some policies are supported by conservatives, because they have very different visions of what the government should be doing and how society should be organized. So now you might start thinking about to yourself, what are you? Are you a liberal? Are you a conservative? Or are you somewhere in between? Because you don't have to be one or the other. Okay, so that ends this section on ideology. Now we're going to move on to thinking about ideology conceptually, kind of a more abstract way of thinking it. And that will be in Assessing Democracy 1.0 and Assessing Democracy 1.1 and 1.2.